Hi, my name's Jules and I work for Storytelling Schools, and we're going to spend some time today looking at how to get from the story and the oral work into the actual writing. So I've got year 3 and they are age 7 and 8, and I've got a fairly average group. I'm going to work with their books so you can see the kind of writing that they do. And I'm going to talk you through the stages of getting from a story to the writing, because it's not just a case of telling them a story and then writing that story. We need to do some deepening in between. Deepening is all in this book. There's a whole chapter on deepening, the games you can play and the kind of talk activities you could do, and I highly recommend you go and look that up. But in the meantime, I'm just going to show you the basics of what I do as a teacher to get from a story and learning a story into writing a story really well for an audience. So right at the beginning of year 3, we did a story all about King Llud. And King Llud was a king in England who realised that there was something wrong with his country. Everybody was being really mean to each other and he didn't understand why. So he went to the wise man who told him to go and listen to the land. So he ends up listening to the land all the way around, and he can hear this screaming. And eventually, having gone right to the top and all the way around the edge and back and forth, he ends up looking for this screaming right in the heart of the land, which is Oxford, which is where our school is based, hence the choice of the story. And he digs a big hole and he finds 2 dragons screaming at each other and fighting, and he pours in some mead, beer, and it calms them down, and eventually they calm down or they fly away, depending which story, and they build a memorial there, and that becomes the city of Oxford. So for us it was a nice story about the city where we live, but it's also dragons, and we were doing the topic of dragons, so it's a great story for us to work with. And I've chosen a child's work because it's nice and legible. It's also where we really hope the children are going to be. It's not above where we hope they're going to be, it is where we hope the children are going to be in terms of using language well in their writing. So this is what she wrote. King Llud was terrified. What will happen? What would he do? He wanted to help, but how? King Llud had the best idea he ever had. I'll go and find the wise man to tell me whatever can I do. He said it took ages to get to the wise man, though. The wise man lived in a mountain. I mean, really inside a mountain. He lived inside a cave inside a mountain. So King Llud packed up his tent and notebook and set off. It took 10 days. King Llud went out of the city and climbed 2 mountains. Then he finally got to the mountain. It was near the peak. King Llud knocked on the door and entered. Why is everyone being so nasty? King Llud said. Listen to the land, listen to the land. Something's wrong, something's gone. We need to understand. There's faint screaming. So that was the middle section. And when we write at school, we tend to take it section by section. So that's the first thing. We never write the whole story all at once unless we've got a really long time to do that. So here is stage 1. We drew a story map. So here's the story progressing through the whole story, and we learn to tell the story from the story map. So this is the hear, map, step, speak. Stage 2, I can sketch my dragon and use adjectives to describe it. So they drew a dragon that they imagined, and they wrote, this dragon has sharp claws and screeches. He's red and breathes flaming fire. My dragon is friendly and it breathes sparkly snowflakes, and its colour is yellow with swirls of pink. So they began by imagining dragons. Then we started to build on that. So attacking, flaming, deadly dragons, firing, punching, kicking. The dragons are fighting. Attack that dragon. So that is a narrative poem. There's a piece of a poem that tells a piece of the story that the children wrote, and it follows a particular format. So I'm going to show you, this is what we call the narrative poem. And I'm going to start by literally drawing 14 spaces for 14 words on a piece of paper. And we then go through them. So I give each child or pair of children a part of the story. So we split our story into that story map. There were about 10 bubbles, and they had a bubble each. And there were 2 or 3 in each group, and they had to come up with particular ways of describing. So this is the narrative poem, and this just gets some good words going. I try to ban them from the and but and if and small words, and we try to just choose really rich vocabulary. So I say to them, okay, we're going to write something, 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 dragon. Because the dragon is in this part of the story that belongs to this group of children. It might have been King Llud, so it might have been something, 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 king. Or they might have had the wise man, something, 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 wise man in their bit of the story. But I gave this particular child the bit where the dragons are fighting. So they were writing about dragons. Then we need 3 adjectives. So the first line, I always put in some adjectives because it starts the poem well. So they chose attacking, flaming, deadly. So we might brainstorm some of these on the board, and we do one of these all together. Attacking, flaming, so that they have options. And deadly. But we don't bother with the and because it's a poem, so we can get away without. Attacking, flaming, deadly dragon. Now we've got 3 adjectives we can use in our writing later. So this is gathering language. Then firing, punching, kicking. These ones are all verbs. And they chose firing, punching, kicking. And then this next line is a sentence describing what's going on in this particular moment. And in the moment of the story, the bubble I've given them from my story map, that particular section of story, they are fighting. So she's written, the dragons are fighting. And at this point, we try to do a sentence. The dragons are fighting. So that works. And then lastly, attack that dragon. This last one, so this is a sentence, sorry, I'll just go back. This last one is a thought. And the thought that one of the characters is saying. So it would be, attack that dragon. Okay, now each group has done a different poem, part of the poem, because they've had a different part of the story. So then we put it all together. So I typed it all in and they came up with this poem to start with. I'm just going to fold back because when we do a better version, we tend to stick it over the top because then they have the first go underneath. And you can see we've edited this poem because they used good a lot. They used kind a lot. They used some words that there's good and kind again, lovely. So we decided that as a group, once we put all our individual verses together and we had everybody's verses together, we realised that actually these are repetitive because we've all used the same ones. So I gave them good and kind from the thesaurus and asked them to edit their poem and to replace the words that were repeated and we could do better. And this is their class poem that came out of it. So it was a class piece of work, but really good for getting a lot of language into the room. Of course, once it's in the room, you want to keep it in the room. So all of these things are displayed around the edge of the room so that we keep them. Then we started to think, okay, what about the king? So to begin with, in order for children to understand what a character is like, they need to be the character. So often when we do things like this, we do a role play first. So I got them to act out a bit of the story and to have a conversation between the grumpy queen who's being mean to him because there's something wrong with the land and it's infecting their moods, and the king. So the king was just saying, oh, please, can I have some breakfast? Or can I come and sit next to you in the garden? And the queen would be arguing back, no. And he would be gentle and he would be kind and persuasive because that was the character that I told. So that was the character they tried to tell in their own stories and then tried to act out when they were acting out. After we'd done that, we then put this shape up on the board and we start to gather words to describe King Llud. So we've got grey hair, old crown, fat, long beard, wrinkles. These are all things we can see on the outside. So they live on the outside of the picture. Whereas internal things you can't see, like kindness, calmness, cleverness, all fit into the centre. So he was calm, he was helpful, he was patient, he was lovely, he was merry, he was focused, he was determined, he was trying, he was confused. So all of those characteristics, which are things that you can't see, we write on the inside, and the children were able to get a sense of those characteristics by being it. So act it first, and then you can jot down what it was you were trying to be. It's much clearer if you act first. So we do a little bit of acting, 5 minutes maximum, then we do a roll on the wall. Now we have a lot of words. Now this would all be on a big chart. So we have a flip chart, and they're all big sheets of paper, and I keep all of them, and they end up going around the room. I particularly like those ones with the sticky back so that you can peel it off the chart and stick it to the wall next to it and have both things up. So handy hint, the post-it ones are the best. So from there, we then have a think about what the character is like, and we practice writing about that character. So I would model a piece of shared writing where I described a character, and then they go and they have a go at describing the character. So the aged king was thoughtful and supportive. He often spent a great deal of time giving money to the poor. Sometimes he even hugged strangers when they were sad. King Llud was fat but was very strong. He had a grey moustache and his eyes were turquoise. Llud wore a black cloak with shiny sequins shawls around his neck. Shiny sequin shoes, and around his neck is some dead fox fur. He had rubies on his ring and tiny white gems in a necklace and one rainbow gem in a ring. So, and I go back and you can see I've done some highlighting of where she should change her punctuation or correcting of things that weren't grammatically correct. But how did we get to that piece of writing? Well, on the board, I would be doing something like this. So having thought about it in advance, what kind of structures could I show them in writing? I would then try to show them live in the classroom. So I'm going to put the something king. What could it be? Now he's old. What's a better way of saying old? So we could say wrinkled, we could say aged. What else could we say? The white-haired king. We could have the decrepit king, the ancient king. And then I pick one in front of them and I go, right, I want it to be kind. So I'm not going to use decrepit because that makes him feel, that's quite nasty, isn't it? So we'll use aged or ancient. I think I'm going to put the ancient king. But at the same time, on the other side of the room, my teaching assistant has got a big sheet of paper just the same, and she's written down aged, wrinkled, white-haired. So we've still kept all of those ideas. Now, not all of your children are going to have ideas. It's going to be the able readers that have the ideas, and sometimes those that are really good at telling stories will have ideas too, and then you'll have children who don't have the language. But you use them and you get them into the room anyway. Because now these are things we've looked at, we've thought about, they're words we know are going to fit, so they're safe for the other children to pick if they want to. Right, so I've chosen ancient, but there's also aged, wrinkled, white-haired available. And I want to say what he was like. Now, we already did some work on this because we have this in the room. So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say, oh, I could put helpful, I could do determined, I could do patient. What do I want to say about him today? Well, I want to make him seem really nice. Because if I make him seem really nice and kind, then it's going to be weird that everyone's nasty to him. So I'm going to put things like, he was gentle and caring, because if I put gentle and caring, then it's surprising if you're mean to him. Okay, and I'm going to put a full stop, and I'm modelling writing that in front of the children, but the children might have said, well, we could use thoughtful. So at the same time, my TA is writing thoughtful on the other sheet, so it's there ready to go. Okay. Then I want to show the children how to write about characters to show what they're like. So I have prepared in my head, he often gave money to the poor and used to invite strangers for dinner if they looked hungry. So that's a way of showing his kindness. So I'm going to start the next sentence. He often, and then I want you to think of something really nice the king could do. What could he do? Oh, he could spend time playing with his children. He could build houses for people whose roofs were coming in. He could lend his horses to someone who needed to travel. All of these things are kind things. And then we write them all down so that they're on here, spare words, and I'll model using one. So he often spent time cooking soup for the homeless. That makes him sound nice. So I've set up my character as a nice character that nobody wants to be nasty to, because that's what I want it to be. And then we're going to emphasise that even more. Sometimes he even And then they're going to think up, because they've got the idea now, something that he did that was really extraordinary. And then from that, the children, if I leave that up on the board, I know they gave me this word, they gave me gentle and caring, and I underline them, cooking soup for the homeless. There will be an alternative on the other sheet, so they can literally swap it in and out. They can change the phrasing if they want to, but this is the stuff we're focusing on today, so stick to this bit. Okay, so then I move on and I talk about what he looked like and what he wore. And by modelling that in my writing, they then come up with a piece of writing that they're writing that's very close to mine, because this is a shared writing experience. I'm writing in front of you, then we'll write together. I'll give you some help, and eventually you'll be ready to write on your own. So there's a lot of teaching of writing that happens in this process. So let's look at boxing up. So boxing up will help us to understand the story and what's going to happen in it going up and down. We know the characters, we know the tale. We're learning to write. Every time we have a writing opportunity, we're learning to write, but now we want to write the story and we want to write it well. So I'm going to box it up. And in this story, and I think this works for a lot of stories, there's an introduction. Then there's the middle one, I would call it, and it's the part of the story where we introduce the problem. Middle two, where that develops. Middle three, and where it all gets resolved, and then the ending, which is what happens after the problem is solved, like Cinderella having a wedding, like somebody winning the whole factory in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's an ending where something lovely happens and we know that everybody's okay again. Okay, so in the intro, we meet King Llud, and we hear that he is king of the land and he's very nice, and he lives in a castle and so on. So we meet that character, and he's got a wife and he's got children. Then we need to hint at the problem. So this is the introduction to the problem. And it's that everybody's being mean, everybody's shouting at him, his children are shouting at him, everybody's cross at everybody, there's fights breaking out all over the town, it's terrible, and poor old King Llud doesn't know what's going on. So he goes to the wise man and he says, well, what's going on? And the wise man says, you need to listen to the land. So they listen to the land and they can hear this screaming. Ah, that's my scream. Okay, so you can hear the screaming. So he has to go and find where the screaming is at its loudest and then find out what's making it. So he sets off. So I'm going to put a suitcase, and he also takes a pen and some paper because he's going to draw a map as he goes. So off he goes, and he goes all around England, and then he goes zigzagging across it, and eventually he finds the place right in the middle where the screams are at their loudest. And he digs a hole and he finds the dragons, two of them, and they're fighting and they're making the noise. And he pours in some mead and they settle down. Right, so now he's solved the problem. And then after that, he goes back to his castle and everybody is happy again. And they build a monument and that becomes Oxford. Okay. So that's boxing up of the story. And I do it pictorially because if you're going to do it with words, it gets really tricky for the children who are brilliant storytellers, but they can't read writing quickly. So this is just really symbolic. It's not a map. It does tell the narrative, but what's important is that narrative is chopped up into sections, because each section is a slightly different part of the story, and we need to know what we're doing in that part of the story so we can write it well. The next thing I would do is a mood map, because the mood map tells us what's going on in this particular story. Right, I'm going to actually turn it this way because it's a longish one. And we're going to start with content is sort of the middle line. So everything above it is a positive feeling, and everything below is a negative feeling. Sometimes we do it from the point of view of one character, but sometimes it's just the general story. Well, in the beginning, there's a nice happy kingdom. So we're going to start in here, content. But then people start being mean. And to begin with, he's confused. He's not angry, he's confused and a bit hurt. And it gets worse, and he's troubled or worried about it. And he goes to see the wise man, and the wise man says there's something wrong with the land. Well, that would be pretty shocking. So he's got to set off on his journey. When you set off on a journey, you're generally a little bit hopeful because you think maybe I'll be able to fix it. So he goes and he finds it. And to begin with, he can't find it. So that's frustrating because you can't solve the problem. But then he finds the place where they're really screaming. The dragons are really screaming, and he feeds them mead. And that must feel lovely. There must be some relief is often the first emotion. And then feeling pleased that it's fixed, and he goes home, and when he goes home everybody's better, and so he must be really joyful at that point. And notice I'm trying very hard to avoid happy and sad, and back to content because everything's better again. So this is the sort of arc of the story that we're going to try and write with the children. It's a useful thing to have, a mood map. Okay, so I'm just going to park that to one side from that moment. All of these things are in this book. Then we will say to the children, okay, today we are going to start writing. We're going to write the introduction. So we need to know all about the king. None of this is going to happen yet. We just want to know all about the king, and we want to make sure that we make him sound really nice. Now, we've already written about him here, so we can use some of those ideas. And we're going to try to focus in on, we're going to approach this introduction by focusing in on the time that it was in and how it's different from now. So it's once upon a time when everything was. So that's the kind of introduction we're going to do. And I would have a piece of writing prepared. And in that piece of writing, I might have prepared in my head long ago, when all the world looked different. People wore cloaks and long, grand dresses. This is my ideas of how we're going to start this piece of writing, and I'm chosen this as a way of showing them how to begin a story. It's all about the when, focusing on what it was like when he was there. Then we'll introduce Llud and focus in on him. So that bit's easy because we've already written about Llud. We can write about Llud quite easily. So let's just get this first bit right because that's new. So this is the sort of writing I've got prepared. It's out of the way. I've written the whole introduction, but I've prepared it and it's out of the way where I can see it, but they can't. Now we're going to write together. I wrote long ago. What shall I write to start us off with the time? I could have long ago. I could have eons ago. I could have at the dawn of time. And the children give me their ideas. And again, I'm writing them down. Anything they give me here, and then I'm choosing the best one that fits, and I'm going to put it here. So in ancient times, great beginning, well done. I like that one, in ancient times, because it sets the tone. And in ancient times, comma, because we're learning about where to put the comma, when everyone, now I can't say drove in cars, everyone rode on horseback. Okay. Oh, in carriages. That's a good idea. We'll get Mrs. So-and-so to write it on the other sheet because I'm using on horseback because that's the one I've chosen. Okay. But there are other ways of doing it. When everyone rode on horseback, and so in ancient times, when everyone rode on horseback, there was a great kingdom. So that's my first sentence. And that's what the children were trying to do, follow my lead of the type of writing that I thought might work. So long ago, when all the world looked different, people wore cloaks and long grand dresses. So I'm setting the scene. And then when I did it live in front of the children, it might look slightly different. In ancient times, when everyone rode on horseback, because I'm using their ideas, there was a grand kingdom. I've introduced the kingdom and the time. Then they're going to have a go, and when they have a go, it might look something like this. So in the 19th century, she's chosen that one as her way in, people wore silk sandals only on their feet. Instead of jumpers, they wore cloaks. Around their necks, are scared animals' fur. I love that. Clearly that was very off-putting for her. Dresses weren't worn, ladies had to wear baggy trousers. So it's a way in. Then the next bit would be that I would show them how to write was focus in on the castle and King Llud, and then tell us about his family, and then tell us how lovely he was, using some of those sentences we already prepared when we wrote the character from before. So the character work is being used in the story writing. Then the next week, or the next lesson, we go, okay, now we need to think about this section of writing. We're going to bring in the problem. And the way that we know there's a problem is that suddenly these people are angry. And how does King Llud feel about that? Well, King Llud feels a bit confused and hurt. So we're going from everything's fine into confused and hurt. And we're trying to show that with our writing. And again, I'm going to write a paragraph that I think does it well. I'm going to have that out to the side. And then I'm going to write live in front of the children. So this is shared writing again, and I'll write live in front of the children, and we'll have that up in the room. Someone else is collecting any language that doesn't make it onto the main sheet. And then they're going to have a go. So one shiny day. So introduce the action part of the story by saying one day, and she's gone for one shiny day. King Llud walked very nicely into the grand ballroom with his ember-coloured cloak. We must have had a lovely focus on adjectives that day. He went to his grateful queen and said, "Hi, my loving queen, how are you today?" "Be less kind, you idiot," she shouted. "What do you want me for?" The queen said. She quickly made a cup of tea and poured so hot tea all over him. Ow! Ow! So we've got this moment where he's all lovely, and there's a shock moment where the queen is all, and we have focused on it. And because we focused on it and I've shown them how to write it, when they come to write it, they do a better job. They do a better job. So yes, this is very supported. But every time we teach them how to do a little bit, they're learning how to do a little bit, and the next time they're more independent at it. So this is at the beginning of the year. I had to support them every step of the way, but by the end of the year, they were able to do a lot more by themselves. And lastly, the last, two more sessions. So there was the middle two. Look, you can see it says middle two. So that was my middle two on here. We were doing this part, listening to the land and going on the journey. Then there was an ending. So I dropped back and I let them write it on their own. So this is the ending, and we didn't get as far as writing the last bit of the story, I don't think, but it doesn't matter, because what mattered was not the story, it's so much as the process of learning to write. So that's how much goes into preparing them to write and teaching them to write before they write by themselves.